It's nearly time for kickoff, which means fantasy football is back. Joining us today is Nick, an FPL stag from Who Got the Assist. Listen for a bit of FPL nostalgia, stats and facts, and some top tips for the season ahead. Gentlemen, welcome to HTO Football. Really appreciate you coming on this evening. Are you both well?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us on. Happy to be here.
Good stuff.
Good, thanks.
Obviously, the season, it's been a crazy year all round, let alone for football. But one thing that does bring, I guess, is a really short summer. I know a very quick turnaround for the season, which, whilst in the football world will mean a lot to get through as well. For the FPL fanatics out there, it'll also mean a quick turnaround for their squads and teams. And you both obviously are a phenomenally successful FPL, I just got it a world really, and that's why I think we want to talk about it, because it's phenomenal, isn't it? Just the focus and the intense scrutiny that fans up and down the country put on fantasy football every summer. And I just wanted to get a few thoughts from you about why do you think it grips fans so much?
I think it's just the additional added dimension, isn't it? Of, everyone follows their own team and you follow your own team's results at the weekends. But with FPL, you're following every single team in the Premier League, and you essentially find that it's a Sunday afternoon, but you're rooting for Burnley to keep a clean sheet or something ridiculous like that. And it just adds that extra level to all the football, and you're following all the players, and it's just also creates a real kind of discussional element to it as well. So you find you've got all these different groups going with old school friends and people, if you're part of the FPL community, people you've met over the internet, and it's never ending, the discussions over who to pick and what players to choose from, and I think that really kind of has created a real community over the past 5 up to 10 years or so.
Yeah, to jump on what Nick said, really, I couldn't agree more with the idea that FPL does add that extra dimension to the fan experience, and it does give you an extra element to the water cooler talk maybe about football as well. But maybe another aspect of it as well is that it maybe gives some football fans a chance to what they think is prove their knowledge of football against their friends as well. It's it's being able to smack talk and say that because they know football so well, their fantasy team is doing well. And I think there is definitely an appeal for a lot of people in that. And then there's another aspect, which is something I've only maybe become aware of in the last 5 years, maybe whilst being involved in the pod and writing articles, etc. on FPL, is that there's a lot of statistics fans out there who really enjoy being able to apply their knowledge with stats, Excel, etc. to football, and then getting results from that in and of themselves. So there's an awful lot of kind of different elements that bring people together and give people interest in FPL.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it's almost taking on that sort of football manager fascination in terms of people literally going away and studying, as opposed to going with the gut instinct. It's it used to be akin, for me certainly when I was growing up, the only kind of fantasy league that I knew was like the Sun one, and you just go through the Sun newspaper, pop that in, have an interest for a couple of weeks, a bit like a long shot accumulator, and then sort of just forget about it for the rest of the season. Whereas now people can really bring that statistical analysis the whole way through the season as well, and so I think a different kind of skill set there.
Yeah, I remember as well when I was probably like sort of 9 or 10 doing the newspaper fantasy, and you had to like phone in and give in your team name over the phone. And I remember actually, because I think I tried to name my team Zola's Goal, and it ended up appearing in the paper as Zoda's Goal. So they completely got that one wrong. But apart from that, I think after that, I'd only been doing fantasy for about sort of 8 or 9 years in total. But we've been doing the podcast. I mean, Tom started it 4 years ago. Anthony joined, I think, last year or so. But it's just incredible to see, just even in the last 4 years, how much the community has grown and how much has changed. And as Anthony said, people love talking about the stats and the data. And there's so many accounts now, producing like our podcast infographics, amazing threads and stuff on Twitter that everyone seems to be getting on that FPL train and trying to add their own input. And like Stag said as well, everyone's an armchair critic, aren't they? So everyone has their own opinions and thinks they're smarter than everyone else. And FPL is a chance to try and prove it in a way.
Is there intense rivalry between the three of you and your leagues?
There definitely is an element of it that, I think we're the first people that we compare our team to anyway at the end of the week before we start to maybe look towards the global FPL landscape for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you consider yourselves experts then? Because that's the really interesting thing, isn't it? Because obviously you run the pod, you run the content, but actually there are some people that live for this stuff. So of the three of you, is that you innately, or actually do you love it? Are you fascinated by it, but probably don't go away and spend the hours poring over FPL Scout and thinking about your team? Are you tinkerers, or actually do you just go with the gut and just have a good time?
I think we're certainly tinkerers. I think when we have to prepare for the podcast, we end up, doing our research significantly to try and pull out as much data as possible, because I think that's one of the niches of our podcast is like when we do give our opinions, we like to back it up with statistical and evidence or statistical analysis. So we will say, Matt Doherty is a good pick in defence, for instance, because he's had so many shots on target last season compared to other defenders, and that, has his attacking period, just an example. So we do try and give as much evidence to our opinions as possible. I don't know if we refer to ourselves as experts. It's got a bit of a negative connotation within the community when people, even though the official accounts may declare people experts, we try and avoid self-declaration where we can to try and obviously come across too arrogant or anything. Yeah, exactly. Especially when you do badly and then you're trying to say, "Oh, I'm really good at this." We always try and say, "Look, this is our opinion. We're not. We can't predict the future. We can't say if Harry Kane's going to go on and score a run or blank or whatever, but we can say here's some evidence to suggest he might do."
And Matt Doherty obviously going to Spurs, it seems as well. So would that negatively impact? Do you think? He's such a performer.
It's something I've been thinking about myself for a little bit because he was in my FPL team, and I think he still will get forward, especially if he replaces Serge Aurier, just because Aurier was getting quite far forward a lot of the time last season, whilst Ben Davies was dropping deep. So I'm not overly concerned that he's going to lose too much of his attacking appeal. And Spurs do have some good fixtures, so I'm still interested in owning him actually. But I know a lot of people out there in the community, are a little bit more concerned that he had all these great stats at Wolves, but he's going to play under a famously defensive manager now, isn't he? So it might be a little bit of a change of role for him, which obviously concerns some people.
But I guess the contradiction with Doherty moving to Spurs as well is that actually statistically Spurs' defence is worse than Wolves, so it actually does reduce Doherty's maybe points potential if you were to just look at it in raw form at least, and if you weren't to be optimistic about Mourinho's chances with Spurs in the coming season. So there is that element to it too. Like there isn't just the questions about how far forward he'll go, but it's just would he even get as many clean sheets and defensive points as he would have at Wolves, who have been ridiculously strong defensively actually when you look at it and compare them to the rest of the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of our listeners, obviously, we're a general football pod, as opposed to sort of a dedicated FPL port of call, as it were. So if there's some first-time FPL Fantasy League novices going for their league this year, what would you say each of you are your top three things? So just for the novice, never put the league together, what are the top three things they've got to look out for and make sure they do or don't do?
I would say number one for me is that don't just pick based on last season's points or based on price. Price does not equal quality. And I think a lot of people kind of make that mistake early on. I would also consider, if you're a complete novice and haven't looked at the FPL scoring system, to make sure you don't pick defensive midfielders in the game. The game does not reward those players, nor does it really reward, strong centre-backs who don't go forward, like Connor Cody at Wolves, who never records a shot ever, for example. And I would also make sure that you put Trent Alexander-Arnold in your team, because he's effectively a midfielder. So don't be put off by the fact that he is so much more expensive than other defenders. He's definitely worth it.
Nick, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with those same points as Anthony's made. I think obviously one thing I'd probably say is to when you're making your decisions, don't do rage transfers, which is something we talked about a lot in the past. Just don't rush your decisions. Take your time when selecting your team and making those transfers. And obviously, it goes without saying, but try and do your research as well. So don't base it just purely on who's famous. Essentially, try and look at the underlying stats if you can, if you've got the time. Obviously, sometimes it's hard for people to find the time, but it will benefit you in the long run if you're committed to trying to do well and beat your friends at FPL. Then the research will really help you. And then I think probably the final thing I'd probably say is try and target value picks as well. So look, don't always go for who's most expensive player in the market, but try and find the value. And as Anthony said, Trent Alexander-Arnold is a value pick because he's only 7.5 million compared to the likes of some forwards like Vardy or Kane who are 10.5 million. But Alexander-Arnold's so good that he can get clean sheets, he can get you assists, he can get you goals, while some of the forwards can only just get you goals. So he is a really good pick in that regard.
I have to be honest, I fell foul. I've been playing FPL for, as I say, on and off for many years. The last 3 years, I've tried to take it a little bit more seriously. I say a little bit because I know some people take it very seriously. But by a little bit, I mean just to keep on looking at my team throughout the season as opposed to sort of forgetting it by October. But I have to say, I'm still so guilty of the occasional sort of rage transfer or overtinker and thinking, do you know what? Oh, it doesn't matter the 4-point hit, I'll take it. And it almost never works out worthwhile. And then you get to the end of the year, I say, well, I've done that 4 or 5 times or whatever it may be. And like, do you know what? That extra 24 points would have me 3 places higher in my league or whatever it may be.
To be honest, it's easier said than done. We've preached these rules over the past few years, and then you break into the season, you watch the football, and next thing you know, like someone ridiculous ends up in your team, like Dan James. Oh, how did he even end up in the team just after 1 goal or something like that? And then you instantly regret it as well.
Yeah, because some people you kind of or know at the beginning of the season that this could be a bit of a goal man. Last year, Lundstrom, like everyone said, like he plays midfield in as a defender, this could be a way to go. Whereas other ones will just come from nowhere. Obviously, just go on a tear in the first few weeks, and then suddenly you feel, oh God, just got to get on that team, which got to sometimes get. And I think like Pookie was doing that early last year, and not many people, certainly not none of my friends, initially had him in their team. But yeah, you just suddenly see it, and then you just start following the goal, even though the goal's already left the pitch by that point, probably, which is always a killer. Are there any such players, the tips this year, those ones that the value, that are out of position potentially?
So I think there's a few out there that are interesting. Certainly, I'm a big fan of Mason Greenwood actually. So he got reclassified from a forward to a midfielder. Last season, he was very cheap last season, 4.5 forward, but he never really played in the Premier League before. But he still managed 10 goals, and he was in and out of that team the entire time. So if they don't sign Jadon Sancho, then Greenwood should be nailed now in that starting 11. And I think he's going to get far more than 10 goals this season, personally. And at 7.5 million, he could be one of this season's bargains when we look back. Because he seems like a player that's got like a lot of potential. So I'm tipping him for big things this year.
And maybe one player who it kind of seems a bit ridiculous to be suggesting that he's kind of a value pick or some sort of thing like that. But Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang is somebody that I think a lot of people would be liable maybe to overlook because of his big price tag and because he's now classified as a midfielder in FPL. So he's competing for a place in your team with the likes of Salah, Mane, any of the Man City midfielders, for example, or Bruno Fernandes. But the fact of the matter is that Aubameyang effectively is he is the talisman, which is, we have a theory, we have a stats theory that we use on Who Got the Assist. Tom, our co-host, he particularly pioneers this thing that we have as talisman theory, which it basically highlights who are the players that contribute the most in terms of FPL attacking returns within their team. And what we found is that it's Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Proportionally, he represents a huge, or contributes a huge amount of Arsenal's attacking returns. It's really disproportionate. It's kind of the sort of thing that you'd expect to see with like Danny Ings at Southampton. He's on that level, but now classed as a midfielder, he's getting an extra point for each of his goals. So we would expect him really to be scoring on a level in FPL like the likes of Mo Salah, and so he shouldn't be overlooked. And I think he could easily be overlooked by managers early on, but he shouldn't be.
Not myself. I mean, I'm an Arsenal fan, which obviously we'll touch on that in a second in terms of personal club bias, because that always, it's ridiculous how much it does seep in, but it does. But yeah, for me, that I go to Arsenal. Arsenal seems to get hold of it. Fans are allowed to go to the football, and to say that we rely on him is very fair. Let's put it that way. In terms of everything goes through him, and obviously, talisman of the club. Obviously on all set pieces as well, penalty, and that kind of thing. You just think everything will go through him, and the price tag's not put me off. But that is another classic mistake for the novice, isn't it? Like not putting in a player of a rival club just because you don't like that club.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, actually, there's quite a famous case though in FPL of one of the previous winners. I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago, before Mo Salah joined Liverpool. I think Ben Crabtree, he won as an Everton fan. He did not have a single Liverpool player all season that year, and somehow he managed to win FPL. So if you are like a militant fan of your club, like if you're an Arsenal fan that doesn't want to own any Spurs players all season, you still can achieve FPL greatness, even though you're kind of hamstringing yourself a little bit just because of your club loyalties. It is a bit of a strange situation because I'm a Spurs fan, but I have found myself like celebrating an Aubameyang goal or celebrating a goal of a Spurs right, and I'm like, why am I celebrating this? Hold on a second, they're knocking out the Champions League slots. What am I doing? And you find your loyalties are a little bit divided sometimes.
It's quite nice for that silver lining though, piece. You're like, oh, the Spurs have won today. At least Kane's bagged the brace. Sometimes it's quite nice for that. So I sometimes quite enjoy putting a Spurs player or two in my team because for that reason actually. So actually, if they lose on the day, I'll be happy because the Spurs have gone and lost. But actually, if they win, hopefully Son or Kane's at least bagging some points. So there's a bit of a small silver lining as we battle it out for the not so damaged places in the league at the moment.
Exactly.
So in yesteryear, and as you're both interested in FPL group, can you remember any sort of standout players that you got from nowhere meant that was there any fans' favourites? Like when you're playing FIFA or something when you're growing up, or Football Manager, you always go and sign a random player because they just do well for you, or you at least have the impression that they do well for you. What was your random player in an FPL environment for the last few years?
It's hard to think of people off the top of my head. Sorry, my headphones just dropped out. But I've got memories, kind of older memories now, of players like Michu and Clint Dempsey. All of these kind of guys used to be FPL legends back in like sort of 7-8 years ago. I remember when Michu signed for Swansea, he was extremely cheap in FPL, and he just seemed to be one of those players that just kept getting goals, and he wasn't expected at all. And he was, an FPL hero. And then same with Dempsey. Dempsey's a bit of a legend as well, just for the amount of goals and assists. He was a talisman of Fulham, wasn't he? You always have a guy like this that, perhaps not that most football fans won't know why are you obsessed with John Lundstram, for instance. You'd be like, you don't know about John Lundstram. He's an FPL legend. He was a 4 million defender getting us all points, And, people are doing images of John Lundstram holding the Ballon d'Or and stuff. And that's, part of the fun of FPL, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, one that definitely sticks out in my memory, it's almost following that Fulham trend, is I had Pavel Pogrebniak as my captain the week he scored a hat-trick for Fulham back in about 2012, and still lives with me as probably one of the best days ever as an FPL manager.
Do you know what? That would stand out, wouldn't it? Because how many people in the country had him as a captain that week? Do you know what I mean? I'd love to know.
It must have been tiny. Yeah,
absolutely. One hand stuff. Do you know what I mean? So that's why it's a special day. You could, that would live long in the memory. But yeah, what next for you guys as a pod though, and as a content? What's next for the assist? Have you got any big plans in the pipeline, or are you just looking forward to the season?
I think mostly looking forward to the season. Really, we're not professional podcasters, unlike there seems to be a growing theme in the FPL community of actual professional people who literally work full time on FPL. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We've got our own lives, like kids and stuff like that. So it's not. There's nothing huge in the pipeline. Well, I've got kids at least. Nothing huge in the pipeline, unfortunately. But mostly just podding weekly. So you can find us on Twitter as well. The main account is at WGTA_FPL. And I'm at WGTA_Nick, and Stag's at FPL Stag. And we just mostly would be doing lots of Twitter posting and podding each week, just talk about FPL and what's happened.
Fantastic.
Yeah, like I think with the Twitter community as well, and the FPL community in general, like you've 230,000 members on the FPL subreddit. There's Twitter accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. There's YouTube accounts that are cropping up who are getting hundreds of thousands of views a week. So it's, I think for us with the podcast, it's I guess about, you know, improving what we provide and streamlining maybe how we present information and things to just try and serve this kind of continually growing number of managers that are involved. With 7 or 8 million teams now are signed up in FPL every year, with about half of that number staying active pretty much all season. So there's phenomenal. A huge interest now. Yeah,
it really is phenomenal. And you know, before well, first of all, thank you very much for coming. Before we go, I'm going to have to ask each of you, what where are you going to finish this year? Well, what sort of top number are you looking for in terms of individually? Where do you fancy? Like you said, you're not going to put it. You know, we're not going to hold you to it. But what kind of finish would you like? What's your best finish? And why are you going to better this season?
I think when people in the FPL community start out, I think the benchmark for a really good season is the top 10k. And I guess as the general manager becomes more active and more educated, I guess, about players, that's becoming harder and harder to achieve. So I think I'll definitely start out with that as my ambition, the top 10k. But getting there is going to be incredibly tough. And actually, I think it's something that we've all found since we started Twitter accounts and started podcasting. It's harder to actually, you know, swim through all the information and actually do well. So getting a top 10k finish would be pretty brilliant, I think. Yeah,
there seems to be a little bit of a commentator's curse. As soon as you start ramping up your social media content, your FPL skill drops out the window. But I agree. I think the target's 10k, top 10k. My best ever is 17k, and I'd really like to crack that 10k if I can. But yeah, it's easier said than done, especially with more and more people joining every year and more content. There seems to be more of a challenge to reach those sorts of heights.
Well, I wish you both the very best. Obviously, wish you got the assists all the very best as well. And thank you very much again for joining us. And we're looking forward to the season. We're running our league this year and for the first time. And yeah, it still takes me back how much it's grown since those days of the sun and riding in your team, like you say. But long may it continue. I'm not at the office at the moment, but I do have fond memories the last couple of years. Literally, you walk down the office space and you just see computer screens with their teams going on. Everyone should be working. And hopefully we can get back to such an environment soon, because it means that we're all doing a bit more FPL and a bit less work, which is a good thing. So thank you very much both for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Thanks. Take care. Speak to you.
We hope you loved that episode with Who Got the Assist, the Fantasy Football Pod. If you're entering this year, why not join the HTO League? It's free to enter and there's prizes for first, second and third. All you got to do is be following HTO Football and join our league via the official app. Our entry code is MG7NA2. That's MG7NA2. Enjoy and best of luck.